Hi, thank you for joining me. So, this week, what I wanted to talk about was the human's idealistic interpretation of horses trying to convey that the human is imposing on them. So, what does that whole title mean? Well, I've had a lot of people send me video clips recently asking to interpret what their horse was actually meaning. And somehow, when people tend to delegate human emotion towards horse behavior, they tend to not believe the horse or what he's trying to communicate. So I saw a few clips where horses were pinning their ears and sticking their nose towards the human's face, and the human is saying, "Hey, my horse wants to kiss me," or "He loves me," or whatever the story was. I've watched where people go in and go, "Oh, he really likes to be scratched here." And the horse is trying to turn his head away, trying to lean his neck or his shoulder away, may physically back up a step away from the person, and yet the person keeps coming because it makes them feel good to touch their horse in that way or scratch their horse in that way, and they are completely oblivious to what the horse is actually conveying. So something you might consider is how often do you even give your horse a voice, in the sense of people like literally will speak the words as if the horse is thinking them, with a certain tone, with a certain emotion, with a certain explanation. And if any of those traits have human attributes, I'll say, then it probably isn't appropriate for what the horse is actually experiencing. So if you watch horses with one another, they're very specific and they're very clear and they're very black and white in their communication with one another, in the boundaries spatially. They're very specific when they are mutually grooming. So if you've seen a horse with another horse facing head to tail, and one is grooming the withers and the other might be grooming the other horse's neck or withers also, it's very specific, and then when it's done, it's done. And it's not this clinging, hanging on, bouncing sort of behavior that tends to happen when humans and horses interact. So the problem with constantly encouraging these horses to be on top of us, or us continuously imposing ourselves on the horse when he has politely tried in many different forms to communicate that he was either concerned or fearful or potentially defensive towards how the human was imposing themselves, is we basically are teaching the horse that if he is reasonable, we will ignore him and we will continue to add pressure. And so, even though it may seem initially like a no big deal, such as in the scenario of the pasture and walking up and scratching the horse, or when he's being groomed, or so on, if we are not believing the horse at the minor degree in which he's showing his discomfort or his concern with being touched in that particular manner or in that particular place, and we keep adding more pressure, then the only thing the horse can do is get bigger in his resistance. And so this leads me to a recent story I heard from someone who was telling me about her friend who, for years, had used treats to encourage the horse to kiss her, we'll say. And so basically, he would take his face and come up to the side of her cheek and impose his nuzzle on her cheek, and it was all great. And he would get a reward afterwards, and everybody thought it was the best thing ever and wanted to teach their horse how to do it. And then there, for some reason, was the day that she came out, and the horse had learned the pattern that every time the human shows up, that this is the how the interaction goes, and came over and imposed himself, which they later realized, and kissed her cheek, we'll say. And then when she didn't have the treat, he tried it again. And she was, of course, dressed with inappropriate footgear, we'll just say, and was trying to move away and saying, "Oh, sorry, I didn't have a treat for you." And yet the horse was pretty insistent that he had learned the pattern that every time he does this behavior, he gets a treat. And so he started coming in stronger at her and with his nose out, pushing into her face. And she started moving away. Well, the faster she was moving away, the faster he was moving into her, until eventually he mangled her foot and bit at her face. Now you may go, "Oh my gosh, this is, an extreme scenario." But unfortunately, what the public doesn't typically realize is how often these scenarios escalate. Maybe not to that extreme, but they're often escalating where initially encouraged behavior between horse and human, which is deemed cute, especially with young horses, small horses, later people realize they've created, monsters in what they've encouraged the horse to to do when they realize that the horse is becoming more anticipative and taking over sooner and imposing himself spatially, and how dangerous some of these things that they're initially encouraged to do can evolve into. That's not to say that everybody who does, tricks or different things like that, winds up leading to this place. But my whole point with this video, because I've been asked several times by people to like make a point about this, is perhaps stop and assess how you and your horse interact. And if you're finding that if you're changing the pattern and the way in which you're interacting when you've encouraged that horse to be spatially close to you or physically touching you, and you start to find that that horse continues to push, continues to impose, and can't let go of a learned behavior, then you're basically setting yourself up for getting hurt and your horse up for getting into trouble later, which then can cause him to be defensive. And then a lot of things can fall apart really quickly. So maybe take a few minutes and think about all those times that you might have deemed were cute moments or sweet moments or fun moments with the horse. And notice if there's really like a habitual expectation of that horse from doing certain behaviors and then he gets something afterwards, like a food reward. And then notice if you don't do that, what is his counter offer? And often people are quite surprised because they always show up with the expected, response to the horse. So it always seems like it's fine until the day they don't. And this isn't just about treats. I mean, this could be anything and how the horse halters, oh, my horse insists on diving into the halter. My horse insists on whatever. He's so helpful to me. Those are all red flags. So take a few minutes, step back the quality, notice if your horse is adaptable, notice if you're adaptable. And if you're starting to see either of you fall apart when you're changing the patterns, then maybe play detective, slow down, and look for some holes in your horsemanship. I'll see you next week.